One of the most important parts of building a good collection is a comprehensive mood board, but since I absolutely hate the one I currently have in my sketchbook, we're gonna make a new one on this wall.
First step is to gather relevant images and print them out.
Now that some of my references are cut out, I'm going to be trying to spread them out in some sections that make sense. So for example, in here, I have a bunch of photos of passports, documents, whatever. And I have this photo of an experiment that I made on my bachelor's collection, which is done in red synthetic leather offcut, which was a reference to this red passport cover. I'm going to link them together because the shape of that thing was also determined by like sharp edges of a passport. So they're together. In here, you can see the splatters of paint that I used for one of my samples, which was a stamp sample. So this was direct reference to this. I'm going to keep them together. I have paper clips, paperclip experiment. They all are a reference to exact same thing. Paper clips that were holding documents. This is a more advanced version of those ideas, but because I never built on this idea, but I can bring it back into my project with this, which looks a lot more sophisticated, I'm going to group them together. Basically so on. You just do that with all of the rest of them, and then we start moving on to the wall. So because I'm not starting from ground zero, it's a little bit easier for me, but now that I've separated everything into clusters, you can kind of notice that some images are larger than the others. The reason for doing this, one, is that the larger the image, the more information it tries to convey, and when you're printing them out, keep that in mind as well. Print the most important, most relevant images in larger sizes, but second of all, not only because they're going to attract the most attention on your mood board, you want to print them in larger size, but also because it's going to be easier to work with images of different sizes in terms of composition. So try to be a bit more playful with that. Also, my images are separated into clusters with logic and with references. Roughly what my project was about is that I was frustrated with document and looking at an airport as sort of a middle ground between two different states. On one hand, it's very formal, you have to fill a lot of different forms and documents and like border crossing passes and whatever. So I was looking at passport photography, formal images, formal clothing and so on. And on the other hand, it's very intrusive, so you get a lot of pat downs, a lot of physical contact, and then your full body is scanned and you're basically transparent. All your underwear is seen, your body is visible. So I created my own body scan, and then I was doing experiments of pulling out the underwear through clothing, so making it peek through, kind of like those images, very monochrome, very three-dimensional but flat at the same time. So I was clustering the images together by logic. So body scans and experiments, underwear peeking through, monochrome here, then all of the different paper clips all together combined as well, pat downs and people pulling your clothing down. I did a pat down map, so I was drawing how officers' hands kind of go throughout the body, so I created my own pat down map. And this is an old experiment, but still I want to maybe keep it here. It's formalization elements and documentation elements, so that I have another reference for the color and the leather that I used. Essentially, that's what you want to do. Group them kind of, but you don't have to compartmentalize. They can always just travel throughout the piece. So basically this is step one. Just kind of try to gather them by logic on a flat surface. Maybe some of the images that I printed out and cut out are not going to be necessary, because in the process of grouping them together into clusters, you will notice that some of them are completely irrelevant. So now we can move on to the wall. Now my wall isn't exactly clean because I'm reusing the same paper that I had with the old mood board. These two pieces are relevant to the collection. A stamp sample, there are different stages of how I worked with it, so I want to keep it there as well. And I'm also not going to move this because it has a wire mesh inside, and it was working with the idea of crumpling the document and kind of frustration. If you're doing a new mood board, again, start with largest pieces. It doesn't have to be a textile sample, but if you have it, it can be one. Just put up the largest piece and start adding your clusters. So in my case, it's going to be all those documents, then this formal element, and then the stamping elements.
In no specific way really. Whatever largest image you added, surround it with the rest of your pictures from the same group. You can overlay them, cover certain areas you want to draw attention away from, and move images all over the place. Add all of the clusters wherever you feel like makes the most sense. When groups of images are close to each other, a new language starts to form. Two references can start creating a unique story and drive your initial inspiration to a completely contrasting point, thus influencing the concept development and the entire collection as a result.
Now that all of my clusters are placed, you will see that there is no specific harsh line as to where all of that starts and begins. For example, these pieces were all together, but the same image is happening on the other side is because it has a reference to another cluster. So in the beginning, I used it to showcase this full body scan in the airport because it was kind of a monochrome. It flattens down all of your clothing, shows your body, and this was reminiscent of that idea as well. So those three images came in a pack, but then I moved one of those images to this
section where you see a pat down happening, a pat down map, and then an undressing experiment kind of showcasing this clothing layering and you having to undress yourself. So they have a reference all together. So that's why I moved one of the images to that side, to that cluster, to kind of bring it all again together and have a link between different sections. This, for example, was the formalization element, and those images come together. But because this was a blank experiment, me looking into passport photography and kind of ripping through the blank with your passport photo, it's only logical to have it next to a blank, which I crumpled because I was talking about having like mistakes and frustration again. So this is visible marks of frustration, angrily scribbling down and crumpling the paper and like being bored, so you just start fiddling around with that piece of paper with your old document and stuff. So this was reminiscent of that fiddling. This was frustration showcased in this blank, kind of tying in together with those documentation experiments with this little image as well, and those documentation experiments with stamps and everything being showcased in this area. This piece is actually finalized look was supposed to have the stamp on the bottom section as well. So everything travels, an idea starts forming and kind of going and flowing from one section to another and being all together tied. Now I'm going to be connecting those details and drawing arrows to different sections that I feel like I have to remind myself what I'm seeing. For example, in this area, this was a leather experiment that I pressed my paper clips into, and I feel like it would be really cool if I could recreate this experiment on leather but then make a bag out of it with this technique. So I'm just going to draw like a random arrow here and write down my thoughts and ideas. So now that all of the pieces are combined together, just write down your thoughts in this section. Reflections are very important. Once all of your images are on the wall, it is the first time you see everything together, and it will make your brain automatically try and find connections between pictures. New ideas will start to form, so write everything down immediately, not to forget. Even if you don't end up using what you wrote down, it will inspire you to make something else, so it will serve its purpose regardless. As an extension of that, you can also add some raw initial sketches, which can later be refined in your sketchbook. Now it's time to add your fabric, threads, yarns, whatever you're working with. Now that all of the fabric pieces are here, the mood board is done. It's not something gorgeous, it's not like the most brilliant composition I've ever done, but when I'm working on a wall, that's not really something I focus on that much. For me personally, when I'm working on a wall, a mood board is never finalized. It's a suggestion of what's to come, it gives you a lot of ideas. So my best tip for you would be to keep it interactive. Add pieces, take them off, highlight some areas, circle around them if they're very important. The best part about it is that you have so much space that you can add as many images as you want and keep, again, clusters of information. For example, if we just look at this section, we see the relevant images, we see the relevant textiles, and some pieces are again colliding with each other. Because this was a section of a mood board with all the passport imagery, we see the red leather pieces are dragging our eye here because this skirt is made out of those textile pieces as well. Then we see a little line that suggests that this print is used on the skirt and all this. So because I know my project well enough, I can navigate this mood board so well. When you're making a mood board, it has to work for you specifically. So you don't have to necessarily use the exact same techniques as I did, like drawing arrows and writing shit down, but I'm just giving you a suggestion of what you can do because this is what works for me. So I added a couple of sketches from my sketchbook in here as well. I just decided to add fabric pieces and even yarn pieces because I knit a piece inspired by this idea with this color palette. But this section on the top I kept empty because I want to add my range plan to it. Range plan, if you don't know, for fashion designers is essentially a lineup of all of your illustrated looks or sketched out looks, doesn't matter, photos. Whenever I'm happy with the look, I'm going to illustrate it in Illustrator and print it out in here, and I'm going to print them out individually so that I can move them around. This is my wall mood board. Here on the screen you see all of the tips that I gave throughout the video, so in case you want to do that screenshot, then feel free to use it. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it and good luck with your fashion project.